my son and his lovely new wife, in an effort to help me declutter my life, sold my late husband's handmade furniture for a few $100s at a yard sale, calling it old-fashioned junk. What they didn't know, what they could never have imagined, was that they had just sold his entire life savings, which he had sewn into the cushions of my favorite armchair. Hi, everyone. My name is Sarah, and many of you know me here as Grandma Sarah. I'm 78 years old, and I'm speaking to you from my living room, a room that feels emptier today, but in a way that is surprisingly full of a story I am finally ready to tell. This is a story about my husband's last laugh. It's a secret I have held in my heart for over a year. A secret I never even told my own son. He knows part of the story, of course. He knows he sold some of his father's old furniture, but he doesn't know what he really sold. He has no idea what he so carelessly, so dismissively, let slip through his fingers. For a long time, I kept this secret out of a strange mixture of anger, and I must admit, a little bit of shame. Shame that my own child could be so blind to the true value of things. But I've come to realize that the story isn't about his blindness. It's about my husband's foresight, his love, and the quiet, brilliant way he protected me, even after he was gone. Before I begin, I hope you'll do me a small kindness that makes a big difference. It takes a great deal of courage to speak about a time when your own child devalued your entire life. So please, if you would, take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our channel. Knowing this community is listening gives me the strength to honor my husband's memory by telling the whole, unvarnished, and rather satisfying truth. Thank you. To understand the poetic justice of that old armchair, you must first understand the man who made it. You have to understand the hands that shaped the wood, and the heart that planned for a future he knew he wouldn't get to see. Our story doesn't begin with a yard sale. It begins with a love that was built to last, just like the furniture my husband, Arthur, created. My story, the real story, began in the year 1965, when I, a young librarian who loved the quiet rustle of turning pages, fell in love with a man who spoke in the language of wood. Arthur was a master carpenter and cabinet maker. He wasn't just a builder, he was an artist. His workshop, a converted barn behind our small house, was his sanctuary. It smelled perpetually of sawdust, varnish, and fresh coffee. He had the most incredible hands, strong and calloused, but capable of the most delicate, intricate work. He had a philosophy, my Arthur. He believed that the world was becoming too disposable, too fast, too obsessed with things that were shiny and new, but had no soul. Anyone can buy a chair, Sarah, he used to tell me, running his hand over a piece of beautiful, aged oak. But a real chair, a chair that will last 100 years, it has to have a story. It has to be built with a purpose. He didn't just build furniture, he built future heirlooms. Our life together was a testament to that philosophy. It was quiet, it was steady, and it was real. We built our home, a small, sturdy house, and we filled it, room by room, with the things he made. The great, solid dining table where we raised our son, Kevin, the surface covered in the faint scratches and marks of 1,000 family dinners. The 4-poster bed he built for us on our 10th anniversary, with our initials carved into the headboard, so subtly you could only find them if you knew where to look. Our house wasn't a showpiece. It was a living museum of our love. And in the corner of our living room, by the fireplace, sat my favorite piece of all, his armchair. It wasn't a grand, imposing piece. It was a simple, sturdy armchair made of dark cherry wood with comfortable, deep green cushions. He had made it for me on our first anniversary, when we had nothing but a leaky roof and each other. That chair was the silent witness to our entire life. It was the chair I sat in to nurse our son, Kevin. It was the chair Arthur would collapse into after a long day in his workshop. It was the chair we sat in together, side by side with its matching partner, reading in the quiet evenings. It was the chair I clung to on the night he passed away from a heart attack, his familiar, comforting scent still lingering in the cushions. That chair wasn't just a piece of furniture. It was a part of him. It was my connection to the 50 years of love we had shared. Our son, Kevin, grew up surrounded by this world of handmade, story-filled things. As a boy, he loved it. He would spend hours in the workshop with his father, learning the names of the different woods, the feel of the different tools. But as he grew older, something changed. The world of shiny new things that his father so disdained began to call to him. He met Brenda. She was a lovely girl, a go-getter, an interior designer with a passion for all things modern, minimalist, and Scandinavian. Their apartment was a vision in white and pale gray, filled with furniture that was sleek and stylish and assembled with an Allen key. When they would visit our home, my warm, slightly cluttered, and deeply personal house, I could see Brenda trying to hide her polite horror. "Oh, Sarah, you have so many thingsy," she'd say, her voice full of a bright, false cheerfulness. "All this dark wood. It must be a nightmare to keep dusted." Deeting. Kevin, my sweet Kevin, who had once loved the stories behind each piece, started to see our home through her eyes. He began to see his father's life's work not as a legacy, but as a burden. He saw heirlooms and he called them clutter. He saw character and he called it old-fashioned. The boy who had been raised by a craftsman had fallen in love with a world that was mass-produced. The real seed of this story was planted about a year before Arthur died. He knew his heart was failing. He knew his time was short. And he saw the way the world was turning. He saw the way his own son was turning. One evening, he came to me, his face serious, and he was carrying an old, dusty shoebox. "Sarah," he said, sitting beside me on the sofa, "we need to talk about the future. My future with you is almost over, but your future is not." He opened the box. Inside, it was filled with cash. Neat stacks of old, soft bills. It was his life savings. For 50 years, my Arthur had been like a squirrel, quietly tucking away a little bit of cash from every single job he ever did. He didn't trust the stock market. He didn't trust the banks, not really. He trusted things he could hold in his own two hands. "This is for you, Sarah," he said, his voice a low, serious rumble. "It's not a fortune, but it's enough. Enough that you'll never have to worry. Enough that you can live out your days in this house, in peace, without ever having to ask anyone for a thing." "But Arthur," I said, my heart constricting, "why not just put it in the bank?" He looked at me then, with a look of such profound, sad, and knowing love. "Because I know our boy," he said softly. "And I know that girl he's married to. If that money is in a bank, it's just a number on a piece of paper. And they are very good with numbers. They will find a way to help you with it. They will invest it for you. They will manage it for you. And one day, it will be gone." He took my hand. "So, I'm going to hide it. I'm going to hide it in the one place in this world that I know you will cherish forever. The one place they will never, ever understand the value of." The next day, he took my armchair into his workshop. He was in there for hours. When he brought it back, it looked exactly the same. The same sturdy cherry frame, the same deep green cushions. But he had a small, secret smile on his face. He had carefully unstitched the back seams of the 3 main cushions. He had divided his life savings into 3 oilcloth pouches, and he had sewn them deep inside, nestled amongst the horsehair stuffing and the cotton batting. He had stitched the seams back up with a craftsman's loving, invisible stitches. "Now," he said, patting the arm of the chair as he placed it back in its familiar spot by the fire. "This isn't just a chair anymore. It's your safety deposit box. It's your independence. It's my last project, and our little secret. For the 5 years after he died, that chair was my throne, my fortress, my secret. I would sit in it every evening, my hand resting on the arm, and I would feel him there with me. I would feel the weight of his love, his foresight, his protection, literally supporting me. I was a 78-year-old widow, living a quiet, simple life. And I was sitting on a secret fortune every single day. I thought it was a secret I would take with me to my grave. I had no idea that my son and his wife were about to force my hand. The campaign to help me began about a year ago. It was a slow, creeping invasion, cloaked in the language of love and concern. It didn't start with a demand for the furniture. It started with a judgment on my life. Kevin and Brenda had just bought a new house, a sleek, modern box of glass and steel in a new treeless subdivision. And suddenly, my own home, the home that had been the backdrop to my son's entire happy childhood, became a problem that needed to be solved. At first, it was just little things. Brenda, in her role as the design expert, would walk through my house, her head tilted, a small, pitying frown on her perfectly made-up face. "Oh, Sarah," she'd say with a sigh, running a finger over the top of my solid oak bookcase. "All this stuff, it must be such a burden to keep clean. Have you ever thought about just minimizing?" One. The word minimizing sounded so clean, so modern, so therapeutic. What she meant, of course, was getting rid of all the things I love. Kevin would quickly back her up, his voice full of a new patronizing tone that he had learned from his wife. "Brenda's right, Mom. This place it's a lot. It's cluttered. A cluttered space leads to a cluttered mind, you know." My inner monologue was a low, simmering boil of frustration. My books are not clutter. My memories are not a burden. My life is not a problem for you to solve. But I would just smile, a tight, strained smile, and say something non-committal, like, "Oh, I'm quite happy with my things, dear." I was from a generation of women who were taught that to disagree was to be difficult. So, I held my tongue. And my silence, they took as a weakness, as an unspoken agreement. Little by little, their suggestions became more pointed, more aggressive. They weren't just commenting on my clutter anymore. They were actively trying to get rid of it. Brenda arrived one Sunday afternoon with a stack of glossy, minimalist design magazines. She spread them out on my beautiful handcrafted dining table, the one with the marks from Kevin's childhood chemistry, set still faintly visible if you caught the light just right. "I was thinking, Sarah," she began, her voice full of a bright, false enthusiasm. "We could do a little project together. We could give this place a refresh, a little bit of paint, some lighter furniture. We could make this house so much more functional." She was talking about erasing my husband. She was talking about painting over the 50 years of love that had soaked into the very walls of this house. And she was framing it as a fun, mother-daughter-in-law bonding activity. Kevin, as always, was her willing accomplice. "It's a great idea, Mom," he said, looking at me with an earnest, pleading expression. "You deserve to live in a nice, modern space, not a museum." A museum. I never not him. The word, meant to be an insult, was, of course, the absolute truth. It was a museum of a life, well lived, and they were the barbarians at the gates, eager to tear it all down and replace it with something cold and gray and soulless. I remember the first time they specifically mentioned the armchair. My armchair. My throne. My fortress. Brenda was standing in the living room, her eyes scanning the space, her nose wrinkled as if she smelled something unpleasant. "You know," she said, gesturing towards the corner by the fireplace, "the first thing that has to go is that set. The two big, dark chairs. They just suck all the light out of the room. They're so heavy, so dated." I felt a jolt of pure, cold panic. She was talking about my chair. Arthur's chair. I said nothing. I just sat there, my hand resting protectively on the worn cherry wood of the armrest, and I felt a low, primal growl of possession rising in my chest. "Mine. The sentence rhythm of their visits became a relentless, percussive assault. Too dark. Too heavy. Too old. Too much. My life, my home, my taste, my memories. They were all wrong. They were all in need of a modern minimalist, Brenda-approved update. I lived in a state of quiet, constant dread. Every time they came to visit, I would brace myself for a new suggestion, a new criticism, a new plan to help me by systematically dismantling my entire world. The shame of it was a constant companion, Shame that my own son saw my life as a source of embarrassment. Shame that I didn't have the strength, or the words, to tell them to simply leave me alone. The final, decisive campaign began a few months ago. Kevin and Brenda announced they were expecting their first child, my first grandchild. I was overjoyed, of course, but my joy was immediately tainted by a cold, sickening realization. They were about to use my grandchild as a weapon. And they did. The argument, when it came, was a masterpiece of manipulative, emotional blackmail. They sat me down in the living room for another family meeting. Brenda was visibly pregnant, and she kept a soft, protective hand on her belly throughout the entire conversation, a constant, silent reminder of the power she now wielded. "Mom," Kevin began, his voice full of a new, unshakable authority. "Now that the baby is coming, we have to be serious. We are not going to raise our child in a house filled with all this." He gestured vaguely around the room, at the furniture my husband had built, the furniture his own father had built. "What are you talking about, Kevin?" I asked, my voice trembling slightly. Brenda answered for him, her voice a soft, silken trap. "It's about safety, Sarah," she said, her eyes wide with a look of deep maternal concern. "All this old, heavy, dark furniture, it's not safe for a baby. The dark corners, the dust, and the chemicals. God knows what kind of toxic old-fashioned varnishes your husband used on these things. We have to think about the baby's health. We need a clean, safe, non-toxic environment." It was a brilliant, unassailable argument. How could a grandmother argue against the safety of her own grandchild? They were painting me as a doddering old fool, content to live in a dusty, toxic fire trap, and they were the responsible, forward-thinking young parents, swooping in to save their child from my sentimental, dangerous nostalgia. My inner monologue was a scream of pure, helpless rage. Toxic? My husband was a master craftsman. He used natural oils and beeswax. This house is cleaner than your sterile white box of an apartment. This is a lie. A monstrous, manipulative lie. Resigning? But I said nothing. I was trapped, outmaneuvered. "So," Kevin said, moving in for the kill, "Brenda and I have a solution. We're going to help you. We're going to hire a company. They'll come in. They'll clear everything out. They'll take all this old stuff, and they'll sell what they can and dispose of the rest. It will be a fresh start. For you and for the baby." And he made it sound like a kindness. A spa day for my cluttered, toxic life. He was not just suggesting getting rid of the furniture anymore. He was announcing its execution. And he was doing it for God the baby. I just sat there, in my armchair, my secret fortress, and I looked at my son, at his handsome, earnest, lying face. And I realized that the boy I had raised was truly gone. He had been completely and utterly consumed by his wife's cold, minimalist, and deeply greedy ambition. He would use any lie, any manipulation, even the well-being of his own unborn child, to get what he wanted. And what he wanted was to erase his father, to erase me, and to replace our warm, story-filled world with something new and clean and valuable, something he could sell. The 2 weeks leading up to the yard sale were a slow-motion nightmare. Kevin and Brenda, now armed with the unassailable excuse of their unborn child's safety, moved with the swift, merciless efficiency of an invading army. They didn't hire a company, as they had threatened. That, I realize now, would have been too impersonal. They wanted to do this themselves. They wanted to be the ones to pass judgment on every single object, to personally supervise the dismantling of my life. They started in the attic, the repository of our family's deepest history. I would sit downstairs in my armchair, my heart a cold, heavy stone in my chest, and I would listen to their footsteps above me. I would hear the sound of old trunks being dragged across the floor, the murmur of their voices, punctuated by Brenda's occasional, high-pitched laugh of derision. "Oh my God, Kev, look at this old monstrosity," I heard her call out one afternoon, her voice floating down the stairs. "It's a rocking horse. Can you imagine putting our baby on something so splintery?" My breath caught in my throat. The rocking horse. The one my Arthur had made for Kevin for his 3rd birthday, with a real leather saddle and a tail made from the hair of an old paintbrush. Kevin had loved that horse. He had named it Sparky, and now it was a splintery monstrosity. They would bring things down in waves, piling them in the living room, a growing mountain of my devalued past. Old family photo albums, my wedding dress sealed in a box, Kevin's childhood drawings. Brenda would look at it all with a cool, detached eye, sorting it into 2 piles, the toss pile, and the maybe we can get a few bucks for this pile. My inner monologue was a constant, silent scream. Lydia, I still ever wedding dress. That's your father's handwriting. That's the clay handprint you made for me in kindergarten. Don't you remember? Don't you care? But I said nothing. I had retreated into a state of shocked, protective silence. My voice had no power in this new, brutal regime. All I could do was watch. The day of the yard sale was a perfect, sunny Saturday. The kind of beautiful, hopeful day that felt like a cruel joke. They had been up since dawn, dragging my life out onto the front lawn. They laid out the furniture my husband had built, the furniture that was supposed to be our legacy, on old stained blankets, like offerings to the god of spare change. They put little, handwritten price tags on everything. $10 for the beautiful, hand-turned nightstand. $20 for the solid oak bookshelf. $5 for a box of my cherished first edition novels. And my armchair, my beautiful secret-filled armchair, and its matching partner? They were placed at the very edge of the driveway, a featured item, with a big, bold sign that read, "Vintage armchair set, sturdy, $50 for the pair." $50. My husband's love, his foresight, his protection, his entire life savings. Valued at $50. The sheer cosmic irony of it was so profound, I felt a wave of dizziness. I spent the day as a prisoner in my own home, peering out through the curtains of the front window. I couldn't bear to go outside, to face the pitying looks of my neighbors, to watch strangers pawing through the intimate details of my life. The shame was a physical thing, a hot, suffocating blanket I couldn't throw off. The most cutting dialogues of the day would drift in through the open window. Brenda was in her element. She was a natural-born saleswoman, her voice bright and cheerful as she haggled over the price of my soul. "Yes, it's solid wood," I heard her say to a woman. "None of that cheap particle board you get these days. The old man who made it really knew his stuff. You're getting a steal at $20. Tidy old man. That's what my Arthur was now. A nameless, generic old man. Kevin was just as bad, if not worse. He seemed to have completely drunk his wife's Kool-Aid. He was trying to be the cool, modern, unsentimental man she wanted him to be. I watched as our neighbor, old Mr. Henderson from across the street, picked up a small, beautifully carved wooden bird that Arthur had made. "I remember when your dad carved this, Kevin," Mr. Henderson said, his voice full of a gentle nostalgia. He was a true artist. "Yeah, he was always tinkering with stuff," Kevin said, his voice a casual, dismissive shrug. "You can have it for $1. We're just trying to clear out all this old junk." Junk. Darn. The word hung in the sunny Saturday air, a final, brutal verdict on his father's life. He had sold his father's art, his father's memory, for $1, and he had called it junk. The sentence rhythm of the day was a slow, agonizing countdown. Every car that pulled up, every person who walked up the driveway was a new threat. My eyes were fixed with a laser-like intensity on the armchair. It was my only concern. The rest was just stuff. Painful, memory-filled stuff, but ultimately just stuff. The chair was my future. It was my independence. It was Arthur's last, brilliant act of love. All day, people would walk up to it. They'd press on the cushions. They'd wiggle the arms. "It's a bit old-fashioned," I'd hear them say. Or, "The color is a little dated." And they would walk away. With every person who rejected it, I would feel a small, guilty surge of relief. My recurring panic thought was, what if someone buys it? What do I do? Do I run out and confess? Do I buy it back from them? How can I explain? I had no plan. I was frozen, a terrified general watching the enemy advance on her last, most important fortress. And then, late in the afternoon, it happened. A large, rusty pickup truck pulled up. A young couple got out. They looked like they were just starting out. They walked directly to the armchair set. The young woman sat down in my chair. Gaming chair. Oh, honey, this is so comfortable, she said, her voice full of a genuine, unpretentious delight. And it's so well made. Look at the wood. The young man inspected it, running his hand over the joints, just as Arthur would have. Your dad was right, he said to his wife. This is real craftsmanship, not like that garbage they sell at the big box stores. My heart was a frantic, trapped bird in my chest. No, 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 I chanted silently, my nails digging into the palms of my hands. The young man walked over to Kevin. We'll take the 2 chairs, he said, pulling a worn leather wallet from his pocket. $50, right? You got it, Kevin said, his voice full of a smug, successful salesman's charm. Great deal. You're lucky you got here before someone else snapped them up. I watched in pure, abject horror as the young man and Kevin lifted my armchair. My fortress. My safety deposit box.t. My future. I watched them carry it down the driveway and heave it into the back of their rusty pickup truck. The young woman handed Kevin 2 $20 bills and a tin. He pocketed the money with a satisfied smile. And just like that, it was gone. My husband's life savings, the secret I had guarded for 5 years, had just been sold for $25. It was driving away, down the street, in the back of a stranger's truck. The world seemed to tilt and go gray. The sound from the television faded to a dull roar. The air rushed out of my lungs. I was going to be sick. I had failed him. I had failed Arthur. I had lost everything. In my weak, silent passivity, I had allowed them to not just steal my past, but to throw away my future for the price of a cheap dinner. The final straw wasn't just that they had sold the chair. It was the look on my son's face as he folded the $50 and tucked it into his pocket. It was a look of pure, unadulterated triumph. He had successfully turned his father's junk into a little bit of cash. He looked so proud, so pleased with himself. He was smiling. And I, watching from the window, I finally, completely, and irrevocably broke. The sight of that rusty pickup truck, turning the corner at the end of my street, with my armchair in the back, did something to my mind that no amount of psychological torment had managed to do. It broke the spell. The paralysis of grief, the fog of denial, the suffocating blanket of shame, it all evaporated in a single blinding flash of pure, unadulterated panic. My inner monologue, which had been a low, mournful hum of loss, suddenly became a single, screaming, action-oriented command. Jet. It. Back. Back. Again. I didn't think. I just acted. I scrambled for my purse, my hands shaking so violently I could barely grasp it. My car keys. Where were my car keys? On the hook by the door, where they had been for 30 years. I snatched them and I ran. I, a 78-year-old woman with a heart full of terror, I ran out of my house, past my son and his wife, who were counting their meager pile of cash on the front lawn, their faces a picture of smug satisfaction. They looked up, startled, as I flew past them. Mom, where are you going? Kevin called out, a look of genuine confusion on his face. I didn't answer him. I didn't even look at him. I fumbled with the door of my old, reliable sedan, my breath coming in ragged, painful gasps. I threw myself into the driver's seat, jammed the key into the ignition, and peeled out of my driveway with a screech of tires that I didn't know my old car was capable of making. I turned the corner, my heart hammering against my ribs. Please, 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 let me see them. And then, a miracle. There they were. Just 2 blocks ahead, the rusty pickup truck stopped at a red light. I didn't have a plan. I was operating on pure, raw instinct. I pulled my car up alongside them, laid on the horn, and frantically motioned for the young man to roll down his window. He looked over, his face a mixture of confusion and alarm. I rolled down my own window, my voice a desperate, cracking plea. "Please!" I shouted over the noise of the traffic. "Please, pull over. I need to talk to you." He looked at me, at the wild, desperate look in my eyes, and for a moment I thought he would just drive away. But then he looked at his wife, and she gave a small, compassionate nod. He pulled the truck over to the curb. I parked my car haphazardly behind them and stumbled out, running up to the driver's side window. I'm so sorry," I gasped, my chest heaving. "I know this is going to sound crazy. But the armchair you just bought. I need to buy it back from you." "Did you?" The young man looked at me with a deep, pitying kindness. "Mom," he said gently, "I'm so sorry. I think your son already sold it to us." "No, you don't understand," I said, the words tumbling out in a frantic rush. "It's not about the chair. It's sentimental. It was my husband's. I made a terrible mistake letting my son sell it. Please, I will pay you. I will pay you double what you paid for it. $100. The young woman leaned over from the passenger seat. Her eyes were full of a soft, gentle understanding that I had not seen in my own daughter-in-law's face in years. "It's okay," she said to her husband. "Let her have it back. It clearly means the world to her." Tears of pure, unadulterated relief streamed down my face. "Thank you," I whispered. "Oh, thank you." As the young man and I were walking to the back of the truck to retrieve the chair, my son's car screeched to a halt beside us. He and Brenda got out, their faces a mask of furious embarrassment. "Mother!" Kevin hissed, his voice a low, angry growl. "What in God's name do you think you're doing? You are making a scene. Get in the car right now." He was not concerned for me. He was concerned for his own public image. His crazy old mother, chasing down customers in the street. The young man looked from my son's furious face to my tear-streaked one, and a look of dawning comprehension and deep, profound disgust crossed his own. He understood. "Sir," he said, his voice calm and firm, and directed at my son. "Your mother is buying her chair back, and I'm giving her a discount." He turned to me. $50 is too much for this much trouble. How about 20? He helped me move the armchair from his truck to the back of my old station wagon. I paid him, my hands still shaking as I counted out the bills. I thanked him and his wife, my voice thick with a gratitude that was so immense it was painful. I drove home, my precious cargo safe in the back. Kevin and Brenda followed me. The moment I got out of the car, the tirade began. They screamed at me, right there in the driveway. They called me senile, sentimental, a crazy old woman. They told me I had embarrassed them, that I had humiliated them. I didn't say a word. I just stood there, and I let them scream. Their words, which only an hour ago would have shattered me, now felt like nothing. They were the meaningless, buzzing sounds of angry insects. When they had finally exhausted their rage, I looked at my son. I looked at his handsome, furious, and utterly alien face. And I knew, with a certainty that was as calm, as clear as a summer sky, that the boy I had raised was gone forever. And I knew that I was finally okay with that. My awakening was not a single moment. It was a slow, quiet, and deeply profound unfolding that began the second that armchair was safely back in my car. The screaming match in the driveway was not a conflict. It was a confirmation. It was the final, brutal piece of evidence I needed to understand the truth of my situation. My son and his wife were not just thoughtless. They were not just greedy. They were my enemies. And you do not treat your enemies with the soft, forgiving love of a mother. That night, after they had left in a cloud of furious resentment, I did not cry. I made myself a cup of tea, and I sat down in my armchair. Armchair. I ran my hand over the familiar, worn fabric of the cushions, and I felt the hard, lumpy outlines of the oilcloth pouches hidden deep inside. My Arthur's last gift. My secret. My future. In that moment, something inside me broke. But it was not a breaking of the heart. It was the breaking of a spell. The spell of motherhood, of unconditional love, of a lifetime of selfless sacrifice. I had poured my entire life, my entire soul, into a vessel that was not just cracked, but had a gaping, unfillable hole in the bottom. And I was done. I was done pouring. The woman who had wept at the window, who had been paralyzed by shame and grief, was gone. In her place was a 78-year-old woman with a broken heart, a deep well of righteous anger, and a significant, untraceable, and beautifully liquid nest egg hidden in her furniture. And for the first time in a very long time, I began to think not about what was best for my son, but about what was best for me. My fight back was not a shouted declaration of war. It was a quiet, meticulous, and deeply satisfying act of creation. A creation of a new life, a new plan, a new Sarah. My first act was a pilgrimage. The next morning, I drove to the bank. I took a single, crisp $100 bill from the small stash of cash I kept for emergencies, and I had it broken down into ones. I came home, and with a small seam ripper and a surgeon's steady hand, I carefully, lovingly, opened the back seam of one of the smaller cushions. I reached inside, past the horsehair and the cotton, and I pulled out one of the oilcloth pouches. My hands trembled as I opened it. And there it was. My Arthur's savings. A stack of soft old bills that smelled faintly of cedar and thyme. I took out $100. And then, I carefully, meticulously, stitched the cushion closed again, my stitches as small and as invisible as his had been. My second act was a quiet and deeply symbolic act of rebellion. I went back to my computer, and I looked up the young man who had sold me back my chair. I had his name from the check I had written him. He was a young, aspiring furniture maker, just starting out, with a small workshop and a big dream. A boy my Arthur would have recognized instantly. I sent him an email. I told him I was an elderly widow who was looking to commission a piece of furniture, a beautiful, handcrafted dining table, in memory of my late husband, the carpenter. I told him money was no object. I told him I wanted him to use the finest wood, to take his time, to pour his soul into it, just as my husband would have. And then, I began my real work. The plan. I was not a woman of finance, but I was a librarian, and I knew how to do research. For the next week, I lived at the library. I read books on financial planning, on trusts, on estate law. I learned about shell corporations and offshore accounts. I was a quick study. I had a lifetime of quiet, meticulous, and deeply underestimated intelligence, and I was finally putting it to work for myself. My final act was the execution of the plan, a plan that was so simple, so elegant, and so beautifully ironic. It made me smile every time I thought of it. I went to a lawyer, a sharp, sensible woman who specialized in estate planning. I did not tell her the whole truth. I did not tell her about the yard sale or the reason for my sudden urgency. I simply told her that I was an elderly widow who wished to secure her assets for the future. Following her advice, I established a blind trust, administered by a discreet law firm in a different state. Over the next few months, I began to feed the trust. In small, untraceable increments, I would open a cushion, take out a few $1,000s in old soft bills, and deposit it into a series of different bank accounts, which would then be wired to the trust. I was a ghost, moving my husband's legacy out of the reach of the jackals who were circling it. And then, I waited. I knew they would be back. Their decluttering project was not finished. They had just been temporarily delayed by my sentimental outburst. The call came about a month later. It was Kevin. His voice was back to its smooth, condescending, concern-trolling best. "Mom," he said, "Brenda and I have been talking, and we're worried about you. That scene you made, it wasn't healthy. You're becoming a hoarder. You're clinging to the past. We have decided that for your own good we need to intervene." He told me they had scheduled a full estate clean-out for the following Saturday. A professional crew would be coming. They would be removing everything. They would be putting the house on the market. He wasn't asking. He was telling. "Okay, dear," I said, my voice as calm and as meek as a lamb. "If you think it's for the best." He was so relieved, so pleased with my easy submission, that he didn't even question it. He thought he had finally beaten his sentimental old mother into submission. He had no idea that I was not a lamb being led to the slaughter. I was the farmer, and I was about to lead him, and his beautiful minimalist wife, directly into my beautifully prepared pen. The week leading up to the intervention was the busiest and happiest week of my life. While Kevin and Brenda were congratulating themselves on their victory, I was a whirlwind of quiet, purposeful activity. My plan had two parts, the retreat and the reveal. First, the retreat. I finalized the transfer of the last of Arthur's savings into the blind trust. The armchair, my beautiful beloved fortress, was now just a chair again. A beautiful, wonderfully made, but empty chair. I hired a moving company, not a downsizing service, but a real professional art and antiques mover. They came and carefully, lovingly, wrapped and packed a few things I truly cherished. My husband's tools from his workshop, my books, my photographs, and of course, the armchair and its matching partner. These items were not going to a storage unit. They were going to a new home. A small, beautiful, and completely anonymous apartment I had rented in a town 300 miles away. A town where no one knew my name. The day before the clean-out crew was due to arrive, I executed the final part of my plan. I went to the local historical society, a place I had volunteered at for years. I spoke to the director, a lovely woman named Eleanor. I told her I was moving, and that I wished to make a donation in my husband's name. I donated his masterpiece, the great, solid dining table that he had built, the one with all the marks and memories of our family's life. I signed the paperwork, ensuring it would be preserved and displayed with a small brass plaque that read, "The Arthur Petrova Table, a craftsman's legacy, donated in his loving memory by his wife, Sarah." My son and his wife had wanted to sell it for a few $100s. I had just made it a protected public and permanent monument to the man they had tried to erase. That evening, I walked through my empty, echoing house for the last time. It was a strange, sad, but also deeply peaceful experience. I was saying goodbye not just to a house, but to a life, to a version of myself. I left a single, sealed envelope on the now bare mantelpiece. The next morning, I was gone. I drove away my old sedan, my few precious belongings safely on their way to my new life, and I did not look back. The consequences, I heard later, were a thing of beautiful, chaotic, and deeply satisfying irony. Kevin and Brenda arrived on Saturday morning, triumphant, with their clean-out crew, ready to liquidate my life. They walked into an almost completely empty house. They found my letter on the mantelpiece. It was not an angry letter. It was not a sad letter. It was a simple, polite, and utterly devastatingly final letter. "Dearest Kevin and Brenda, you were right. The house was too much for me. The memories were too heavy. The clutter was a burden. You were so very right that I needed a fresh start, a clean, minimalist, and non-toxic environment. So, I have taken your advice. I have moved. I have gotten rid of all the old, heavy, dated things that were causing you both so much distress. The dining table I have donated to the Historical Society, so that it may be preserved as a piece of local history, a testament to your father's wonderful craftsmanship. As for me, I have decided to take a long and much-needed vacation. I have sold the few remaining pieces of junk that you were unable to sell at your yard sale, and I find that the proceeds are more than enough for me to live on quite comfortably for the foreseeable future. Please do not worry about me. And please, do not try to find me. I have, as Brenda so wisely suggested, minimized my life, and I find that it is a wonderfully freeing experience. Ye wish you all the best with the sale of the house, which I leave to you, and with your new baby. I am sure you will be wonderful parents. And, sincerely, Sarah Petrova. The fallout, as my old friend Martha later told me, was spectacular. Kevin and Brenda were left with an empty house that they then had to sell in a down market. But the real blow was a social one. The story of the dining table and its beautiful plaque at the Historical Society became the talk of the town. People, the same neighbors who had watched them sell their father's legacy for pennies on the lawn, were not stupid. They understood. They saw the public act of filial piety, and they contrasted it with the private reality of their greed. Kevin and Brenda didn't just lose a fortune they never knew existed. They lost their reputation, the one thing they had valued more than anything. And me, I found a life I never knew I was missing. In my new quiet town, I'm not a mother, not a widow, not a hoarder of old things. I am just Sarah. I have joined a book club. I have taken up watercolor painting. I've made new friends. My most prized possession is the beautiful new dining table that sits in my small, sunny dining room. It was delivered a few months ago by a proud and very grateful young furniture maker. It is a masterpiece. It is made of the most beautiful cherry wood, and the surface is so smooth, it feels like silk. It is a new table, with no old scratches, no ghosts of the past. It is ready for a new set of memories. My memories. The greatest lesson I learned is that the true value of things is not in the object itself, but in the story it contains. My son and his wife saw a pile of old, unfashionable junk. They were blind to the stories, blind to the love, and blind to the fortune that was hidden in plain sight. My husband, Arthur, in his infinite wisdom, knew that. He knew that his greatest legacy was not the money itself, but the love that had created it, and the love that would, in the end, protect it. So now, I speak to you. To anyone out there who feels that their life, their memories, their treasures are being devalued by a world that is moving too fast. Do not ever, ever let anyone else tell you what is valuable. Your history, your stories, the things you have built with your own two hands and your own loving heart. They are the only treasures that will ever truly matter. And they are worth more than all the money in the world. Thank you for being here with me today, for letting me tell my husband's and my story. If this story has touched you, please like this video, subscribe to our channel, and hit that notification bell. In the comments below, I would love for you to share a story about a single object in your life that holds a priceless memory. Love you all. This is Grandma Sarah, and I'll see you in the next story.